Well, what is it that makes the South spicy? Is it the food? Is it the nightlife? Or is it the brilliance of the man that is the pride of Louisiana when he's not rocking in the courtroom and running his own law firm, visiting churches all over the world? He's a staple on court TV as well as a number of other news outlets and killing it on his own podcast and on social media and on Talk 107.3 with Brian Haldane. He is the incredible Hurricane Franz Borghardt. Joined as always by a
Hurricane.
Truth or Derek podcast Hall of Famer, a mere 2 states over, also incredible in the courtroom, on social media, and running his own law firm. You know him from Court TV, CNN, ATL News One, Scripps, and a million other places when they need great advice. He is the deep digging, tell it like it is Georgian badass that is Joshua Schiffer. Joined for the first time by America's criminologist with a combined 35 years in law enforcement, whilst developing and teaching over 25 courses, has been on drug task forces, founded a consulting company, and spoken at more than 1,000 conferences. Kicking ass on the streets and on the barbecue, Kansas's very own Dr. Sheriff Currie Myers. How the heck is everyone doing today?
Doing awesome. Thanks for having us.
Very good. Very good. Excited about this conversation because we were just talking before you hit record, and this is the policy stuff. And Doc is one of those guys that has been there and done it and seen it, and brings that kind of wisdom of someone who can speak from the field. And that's my problem with so many of the politicians and the people that like to talk and oftentimes have the biggest pulpit. They've never been out there because law enforcement doesn't get the opportunities in leadership like lawyers, former prosecutors, people do. Like it's not as common. So it's really important to take into account when we're talking about criminal justice, that perspective of someone who's been there and still has the political mind and the idea about how policy is important when we get to these criminal justice issues. Because we're seeing big problems in our system right now. This episode is happening right after another completely horrific, unjustifiable, are you kidding me, couple of shootings. We had an Appalachia shooting in Georgia, about 50 miles from me, where a student brought in an AR-15 and killed 4 people, 2 students, 2 adults, and then injured several more. And then literally 48 hours later, somebody goes out, buys an AR platform, 2,000 rounds, and starts taking pot shots at people driving in the middle of Kentucky. So there's a lot to talk about here.
Josh has a very interesting, and dare I say, I love it, theory about firearms and what we can maybe do to modify. I'm going to let Josh speak about that, but I kind of want you to throw that up.
Yeah, just because it's something that, and I did not come up with this. This comes out of not me. I just find, as someone with my particular political leanings, something that's effective. I don't want the government to take away your guns. The Second Amendment's unbelievably important.
We're gun guys. We're gun guys.
We have way too many supply issues on the firearm side, where firearms are out in the marketplace and they're being picked up by people who shouldn't have them, and that don't have the requisite necessary common sense that our founders thought we would when it came to firearms. So my belief is, I'm a big private sector efficiency guy. Let's require insurance. That doesn't require the government tracking your firearms. No one's going to create no, you have mandatory carry possession insurance for every firearm. The insurers, they're the ones that get to create lists and determine who gets firearms and not, based on their private sector. And you should be able to buy a fully auto firearm. The way we separate and categorize firearms is dumb. It's just dumb. A 22 and a 50 cal are governed the same way, yet we can't figure out select fire, burst. It's mind-numbing to watch politicians try to pick apart guns mechanically. But I firmly believe that a mandatory insurance requirement would solve our problems, because then the lawyers will sue the crap out of people who aren't safe with guns. It will get rid of the loose guns nobody wants to take credit for, or law enforcement will just take them. Just take them. I love law enforcement getting those guns. They go to auction. They fetch good prices.
We destroy ours in Louisiana, which is unfortunate.
You guys destroy your guns?
The seized guns get either destroyed. They don't get. They used to auction them. And I will set Dot before you jump in. I will say also we have it in Louisiana to where we used to require a concealed carry permit. Now you don't have to have a concealed carry permit. However, we are a state where if you have the permit, you get liability shielding. So, I mean,
see, I like the idea to take care of it fast. See, I have a thing, and we've talked about this before when we had Coffin Daffer on about what we always joke as is the candy ass generation that we're dealing with now. Where back in my day, when I was in junior high school, which for us was grades 7, 8, and 9, it seems like they had less of a problem singling out the kids that you thought were going to be a problem. And I'm talking about the Colt kid with the shooting that was last week. Now, it's almost like everybody knew, the kids' parents knew, they did have a special class for kids that they would deem problem kids. So at least then they were separated, but they were separated for good reason because we knew these kids outside of school. And you could tell, I don't want to say it was a bad egg and all that, but it seems like this case, that the one that happened last week, everybody knew that was sort of going to go down, or something was going to go down.
The tribe protects itself and will identify the problems, but we have too large a scale, and it's impossible for all. Like it's a giant scale, and you're right. We do need to address, the school thing. One of my problems is you're not allowed. Schools have been granted immunity from all lawsuits in Georgia, which is great because otherwise schools would never get out from under the thumb of jerk plaintiffs' lawyers. But just like with law enforcement qualified immunity, by giving unlimited immunity, you create a zone where a bunch of bad crap can happen because no one goes and fixes it. It's that the ball player that was just pulled over, Kyrie Smith. The reason that the officers were well within their rights to act the way they did and are trained that way, even though I think it was unprofessional. I thought it was tasteless and should have been handled way better, and that officer needs way more training. There ain't no civil rights claim in there. Let me tell you that. You ain't getting in 1983 against an officer. Sorry, find me that circuit. And we've created these problems where officers aren't being given the right freedom training to do their job effectively. They're practicing defensively, but they also have this giant gulf where no matter what they do, nothing's going to happen other than maybe a disciplinary slap and tickle, which our disciplinary issues with law enforcement is problematic. Just like a lot of big organizations, we tend to let you go away and go get a job doing the exact same thing somewhere else, and we just don't tell anybody about it.
So, Dr. Myers, in your career, again, your long-spanning career, how is the gun issue with younger people different now than it was, when you got into law enforcement?
Well, I mean, I go back to my high school. Every one of us carried a 22 and a shotgun in our truck.
In a truck?
Everyone.
Everybody. So, I mean, here's my take on it. Let's remove the gun issue for a second. I think we have a huge mental health problem in this country.
Huge.
I think that's the major cause. In fact, if you look since 1982, if you look at the 150 significant mass shootings that have occurred, only 14 were considered not a result of someone who had significant mental health issues. That is a significant number that have mental health issues. And it's only exasperating over time. It's gotten worse. Part of the reason is we no longer treat people. In my opinion, we have become a society of enablers and not treaters. So in many ways, we'll say, oh, you're okay, I'm okay, come live with us. And there are people that, for instance, let's look at California. If you want to look at criminal justice, what I think is bad criminal justice public policy is called Proposition 47, where they had decriminalization of all drugs, including fentanyl, including cocaine, including heroin, and they basically made property crime up to $1,950 per incident a citation. So nobody's getting arrested for property crime or what used to be drugs. Crime is running rampant in California. I just got it back from Riverside County. I was embedded with the sheriff's office down there, and I was astonished at the results of Prop 47. But 3 of the issues with Prop 47 is there's no longer mandatory jail. A judge used to have 3 options: mandatory jail or prison, mandatory mental health, or mandatory drug treatment. And Prop 47 did away with all those. The judge doesn't have any recourse now at all, to include jail.
Yeah.
So people are just out, and we've seen some of that criminal justice public policy go into other areas that are more progressive states. So I think the first thing we're seeing is we're not addressing mental health, and there is a disconnect. There's a lack of communication between law enforcement and mental health. And we don't talk well together. We don't share information well together. Some of that's for legal reasons and HIPAA and other things like that. But
HIPAA, the most well-intended, but are you freaking kidding me?
Right,
dumb.
right. So as a result, what do we have? Every one of us just talked and reaffirmed, and we nodded our head that in most of the events of an active shooter, people could have said, yeah, I'm not surprised that person did this. And
it's never a true surprise.
Yep. So we're not putting these things together. In fact, if you look at 9/11 and the 19 terrorists that came into this country, they were stopped by police. There was information about them, and nothing was followed up. Yep. So I'm a huge believer, and you want to talk about good public criminal justice public policy, is about evidence-based policing. And we don't have evidence-based policing. You're lucky to be able to look something up that's a year old on any kind of crime data that's going on. In fact, right now people are saying it's lower crime than it's ever been. That is not correct.
Oh yeah, no, this is where my progressive buddies get screaming mad at me, because my belief that our biggest problem with law enforcement, and would solve the vast majority, or certainly deeply address the vast majority of our problems with law enforcement, criminal justice. Being a police officer back in ye good old days was a solid job. You went to work, you could raise a family, you put your life on the line, but guess what? There was respect, there was a pension, there was health care. You wanted that job. Yeah. Being a cop now in the United States is actually not one thing. I get yelled at by my friends in New York, where apparently some of these cops are the most overpaid, just wastoids in the world. Down here, we don't pay our cops shit. It's disgraceful how poorly compensated. You would never do these jobs. And then go, hey, to really make your living, you're going to do all your work outside of the badges, private, and your extra job. So now you're always going to be tired. It's the most garbage system, and we will never fix law enforcement or address it in the Southeast until we make law enforcement a job people fight to get. I want a law enforcement position to come up and there to be 5 applicants. And that's the job. That's what needs to happen.
On top of all that, because we're underpaying, officers can't afford to live in the metropolitan areas that they're policing and have to drive 30 minutes, 45 minutes into town.
Downtown
and then we get
Atlanta, baby.
Yeah. And then we get pissy because we want cops that live in the community, but they can't afford to live in the community.
Or they don't want to because they're working the streets and they know they can't enforce the law. Or
they can't enforce the law.
Prosecutors aren't prosecuting the cases, or the public school system is horrible. I put all my kids into Catholic school. I'm a devout cat. Our family's devout Catholics.
Oh, you're winning big Franz points there.
And I have my Substack on applied criminology, Dr Currie Myers.substack.com. But I also have one on the Catholic faith, family, and formation called the St. Michael's Group .substack.com.
And say that slower in case somebody wants to write that down.
Okay, so it's drcurriemyers.substack.com for all my criminal justice public policy. You know, as an applied criminologist, and I consider myself a criminal justice ethicist. And then I have one for faith, which is stmichaelsgroup.substack.com. And there I opine on faith, family, and formation, or the lack thereof. I'm a big believer that the main causal reason for crime in the world is due to a lack of faith, family, and formation. We don't serve something greater than ourselves. That's part of the faith side. If you truly believed in your faith, you wouldn't attack somebody else because you were brought up in that. The amount of the family, parents play an integral role. Having a dad in your life plays an integral role. Having a mom in your life, it plays an integral role. They're responsible for your faith, not the church. The parents are responsible for that to get you to church. And then last, and probably just as important, is formation. And that's not just academic formation, which is important, but it's also how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to act civically, how to interact people, do's and don'ts. Those are things that are taught. It's observational learning. And when you don't have all those things, we're going to rely on observational learning that's going to be negative. And now what do we have? I wrote a book called The Advent of Feral Man. And in The Advent of Feral Man, I talk about the wilding of humans that we're seeing, in particular America, where now you're walking down the street and somebody will punch you out of the blue. Somebody will push you on the subway tracks. They will drag you behind a car and rape you. We're seeing a different type of crime and a different type of criminal today, in my opinion. And I think my research shows that. But we have to have an honest opinion about it, and we have to be truthful in data. And that's the reason I said when people say crime is lower, the FBI data has been spurious for 5 years. For 5 years.
I don't trust one set of statistics that comes out from law enforcement, because guess what? First of all, you got hundreds of different agencies, all of whom have different political levers to pull when they're creating the data that goes into these statistics. I have seen data manipulation, both well-intended and malicious, occur in multiple private public organizations. I don't trust that crap, because guess what? I just, it's impossible to determine its accuracy and to build plans off that kind of stuff. I have a giant question with statistics.
Right. Here's my view. All research has a cognitive bias.
Yes.
Of course.
Everything does.
Yeah.
I do. I have a cognitive bias when I do my research.
Nobody wants to research themselves and prove it wrong. I'm going to show you the good stuff.
Yeah.
I'll put the,
my thing, partial. Partial.
Oh,
fair.
I'm super prejudiced. Like I tell people all the time, bias everywhere. It pours out of me. I've been armed robbed. There's a bunch of bias that goes into that. I was raised in an upper middle class, really scientific, highly educated family. There's a lot of bias that goes into that. I was also raised part redneck. There's a lot of bias that goes. Bias is everything. And it cracks me up when we talk on television. So what is jury selection? Jury selection is the most pure bias-based exercise you could. Hold on. You know almost nothing about these people. Ask them super limited questions, then make decisions on how they're going to do something in the future.
Yeah. Oh, your neighbor's a cop?
Yeah. Dude, what's your bumper sticker? Like that stuff drives me bonkers.
So we absolutely shouldn't judge books by their covers, but in real time,
here you can't. Here you're supposed to.
Well, so if we're talking justice reform, if you give me unfettered, unlimited jury selection, I won't judge a book by its cover. But if I'm limited to an hour with 14 to 16 people, I'm absolutely going to judge. And if I'm in federal court where I don't even get to do jury selection,
you don't even get to do that. Yeah.
I mean, you're pretty, you're ugly. Oh, you're a cop. You're black. It's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Yeah. And people think that justice is blind, and no, it's very real, and your justice is so much more local than I think people understand. What happens in your community, and that's your community. There are some general guidelines the rest of the nation follows, but the differences from community to community, state to state are just nuts. What happens in California, like you're talking about, I know it's happening. I got friends who live in these communities who are like, no, people just steal constantly and no one gets. I'm like, man, I live in one of the most progressive parts of the New South. We arrest the hell out of thieves. You shot. That's something the police will show up. Do they show up for your stolen car? I do that electronically now. But if you're a shoplifter, you're getting locked up. Like the use of jail, I think, is a big conversation we need to have as a nation, because at least in Georgia, we found out that jails are really expensive and there are problems with them. So we try to enforce a bunch of stuff through like suspending your privilege to drive. Talk about a dumb way to manage and engineer a community. You can't use the thing that's necessary to earn a living.
Yeah. Yeah. My difficulty is it's not rocket science. I don't think this is rocket science. I don't think criminal justice public policy is rocket science, but we lurch so far to the left or so far to the right. And I say that I'm a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. I have my beliefs on certain things, but for instance, we went so far to the left on criminal justice public policy just recently in the last few years. I believe in bail. It's in the Constitution that we should have the ability to have bail. I'm not against bail. I believe in bail reform to some extent. But when you use cashless, when you say zero cash bail and uniformly apply that without any threat assessment, without any classification of the offender, then that's horrible. It's the worst idea ever on the face of the earth. And what has happened? We have prosecutors in progressive states are using zero bail and it's affecting us.
It's prosecutors in specific parts of states. That's one of the interesting issues we have here in Georgia. And in fact, our prosecutors, we have 159 counties. Every one of them has a DA. Every one of those DAs is the highest constitutional officer in that county. Basically, he's the governor of that county. And now we have an issue where due to, and it wasn't even Fonnie Willis originally, we had a prosecutor in Athens, Georgia, where UGA is, that people really didn't like because she was doing some patently weird stuff. And now our legislators getting involved in how are we going to now affect the high constitutional officer office of district attorney. And that's a big concern for me, because justice needs to be personal. My biggest problem with the no cash bails, just like you're talking about, one size solution does not work. When I was a public defender, those years ago, you knew who your frequent flyers were. You still do. That hasn't changed. I firmly believe that there's a certain percentage out of 100%, and it's small, but it's very loud and apparent and unmistakable. There's a small percentage of 100% of humanity that really struggles with society. And we need to figure out how to handle those people, because he don't care he's getting arrested for the 57th time. I've had clients that have over 100 arrests.
Do you know what?
You cannot arrest yourself into a better society, but we got to guarantee the rights of people, and that includes the rights of store owners and people in the community.
Right.
And it's amazing how you guys are pointing out that the problem is different in different spots. Because I know, Josh, you'll remember when we were talking with Matthew Mangino a little while ago, they have a minimum set bail. He's just outside of Pittsburgh at $175. He was saying most of the time, most days, 9 out of 10 people don't have $175.
Oh yeah. There's tons of people with not two nickels.
And that's what Josh said with the frequent flyers. You could look at this guy and say, you might as well ask for $1 million, because he doesn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. So $175, what's the difference?
Yeah. And it's, how do you manage these cases? When I was doing work in misdemeanor court back, we had people who basically just live on probation forever. and there's always a violation, and they're always going to get their chronic homeless mental health, which is then crime, because the mentally imbalanced, not getting medication, not supported, no family, fell through the cracks and no one's there to pick them up, because we depend on religion and the goodness of humanity, which has not fulfilled all of the possibilities. We have these people that are the most fragile of God's creation. Like, these people are beyond fragile. They do not operate on the same plane of existence as us, because they literally don't have an existence outside of drugs to solve their brain, food to be stolen, anything to be fenced. And it's pitiful. We should feel awful as a community for that cancer living amongst us. And it's a failure of us as a society that it continues.
What I thought was remarkable from my days of being a public defender was, so my life expectancy is whatever my life expectancy is, right? I'm 45. I think I got a little bit of time left.
I hope so.
Some of these, yeah, me too. So these young guys though, that are like, I don't plan on living past 28, or I don't plan on living past 30. And you're just like looking at them like, huh? And then you start looking at like their genealogy of like, when did their dad die? Where is their dad? Where's their grandfather? And you're like it's not like these people aren't thinking about a 401k. And, you know, look, at the end of the day, maybe I'm just cynical and jaded. And I'm the first as a slightly right-leaning criminal defense attorney who's uber Catholic. I'm the first to say that some human beings need to be in cages.
Oh, wait.
However,
and that gets you just excoriated when you try to talk about it with some people.
Right. However, I'm also convinced that putting people in prison isn't going to deter shit.
No. You know, I see, and it's interesting. Like we talked about at the top of the show when I was talking about when kids are in school, you could get some sort of system. I remember, I hate to use it as an example because I don't have a lot of respect for Dr. Phil, but you'll remember when he used to do those specials and he would have the kids in where they had, 17 of the 21 markers that serial killers had and things like that. This has to be found out at a certain age, because as soon as you get to 12 or 13, again, depending on where you grew up, if you have the family set up like Dr. Myers said and all that sort of thing, you guys know that 12, 13, 14, it's like the fucking Wild West when you're out there, because after that, you have the freedoms. A lot of these people get to 15 and 16, you can drive. If you don't have parents around and all that sort of thing, there is no, and again, like Franz said, these guys are not going to be till 30. They're just thinking about today or the next day. So there really isn't that much time that you can get.
I think there's way too much unpredictability and volatility at that end that is influenced by things like family and background. But I went to a prissy private school. Plenty of those kids came from really good families and ended up as screw-ups. I remember directly my biggest left-right turn in my life when I got my first high school girlfriend. I stopped hanging around with a group of friends who I still know that had a certain direction, and I chased her as only a teenage boy can chase, and fell in with her group of friends who were all college bound. And the difference, even though it's the same little school, it's marked. And I totally could have not kissed her on that couch that day and probably gone down the highway to some friends with very colorful lives these days.
Josh was that kid. They're like, "Do you want to go smoke some weed?" He's like, "No, I'm going to go do some homework."
No, I'm going to go chase the tail. That's God gives you hormones for a reason. You gotta follow them every once in a while.
I wanted to ask all three of you guys. I just wanted to go back to what Josh and the doc were saying about police and respect and all that. And again, Dr. Myers, you were on the streets for a while. Did you think it was easier to be a cop before camera phones and body cams and all this sort of thing? Just because, I mean, I don't want to, no, you don't have to be a dirty cop, but if the perp or who's ever out there can assume that, you might be out there stomping heads and doing this, that, and the other thing, you would be less likely, where now it's like everyone just pulls out their phone.
Well, I think it depends on the person. I think, there were officers in the past that were stand-up people and they behaved. It doesn't matter if a camera's on you or not. You're going to behave the right way with everybody. I mean, it's I don't think any of those kinds of things. It kind of goes back to, were you formed correctly, and do you treat society as well? I tell my students every day, we're supposed to look at each and every person, and I can do this because I teach at a Catholic college, Benedictine college, and I say, you got to look at a person like through the eyes of Jesus Christ. That's how you got to look at people. Now, that person may do something in which you have to pull out your gun and then kill them. So you have to be situationally aware of the constant changes that could occur. And that's the difficulty. I was one of the first sheriffs. I was sheriff when body cameras started just to become big, or just started being talked about. Well, I did a beta test in my department, about 750 sworn. So it's good size. It's not like New York, but I mean, for Midwest, it's.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty good sized department.
I had one of the larger sheriff's offices in the Midwest. And it's, again, 650,000 people that you're serving, $120 million a year budget. So, and it was a wealthy county. So great prosecutors, great attorneys on both sides of the aisle. And our law enforcement was very professional. But I was one of the first to embrace body cameras. And here's the reason why, is when some officers were first resistant. I can't believe I'm being watched. That's bullshit. Law enforcement, we're the first ones to complain about things. It's in our nature. We're around bad things all the time. We're complaining a lot about how things are done. I can't believe you want to watch. Why? You don't trust me? What's the deal? But my research found that our use of force complaints dropped 95%.
Jesus.
And if you look at data across the United States, use of force complaints go down anywhere from 80 up to where I was at. And the reason is, and I'm going to pause for effect, people will lie.
Oh,
People are
So,
they're not going to lie. It's fine.
so I'm not saying that use of force doesn't happen, but I think in the interactions that occur across the United States, I can't remember the total interactions. I did a study on it once, but less than 3% of the total interactions of police ended up with use of force. That doesn't mean shooting somebody. That means hands-on. Less than 3% of the interactions that law enforcement does ends up in use of force, and less than 0.5% end up where there's some shooting or something that somebody's killed as a result. And yet you ask the people on the street, they'll say police are killing 5,000, 10,000.
the perception versus reality is very because so I practice civil rights. I've tried civil rights cases involving police abuse. I've done 1983. Never, ever, ever tell anybody you do civil rights, because then everybody that believes they've had their civil rights violated will contact you. And one of the first things I tell people is most people don't understand the idea of what your civil rights really are. And so a lot of people that scream about civil rights, you just turn it off until they get a little bit more specific. Civil rights are really specific. And when you're doing the analysis, you always have to remember the multiple perspectives, not just the person who feels they're being abused, but what most people forget is turn around and look at public policy from an officer. That's not to mean that there aren't abuses in the civil rights system from all sides, and that there aren't just indefensibly bad case, man. We've seen them, but we fight over the idea of civil rights so much that the civil rights fight, we're losing it because neither side is winning. They're just beating the crap out of each other. The vast majority of police use of force is due to failure to follow an officer instruction. And most people don't understand that. And when an officer wants to use force, the problem is they all know how to get into a situation where it's authorized. And
Stop resisting. Stop resisting.
That's where I generally get, because I watch these videos all the time, and I'm the first one during the civil rights intake be like, sorry, man, here you are, clearly not following law. Like, you
Get out of
gotta
the car. What?
that's why I love body cameras, and
So-
my best cops all love body cams. Love them.
Yeah,
But
because
it's
I mean,
the same stuff where the bad cops are like, shit, I gotta hit audio pause on. It's like, no, man, I'm gonna eat you alive on the audio pause.
yeah, I mean, part of it is we know we're being watched, so that also our behavior is going to be, I'm going to be especially good, and I'm going to communicate even, or try to communicate even better. Now, I'm not saying things don't happen, because they
of course
do. I was somebody who investigated police corruption. I also investigated prosecutors that had gotten involved in corruption, and I also investigated some judges that had got involved in corruption. And I'm an expert witness in 1983 litigation, and I've testified in federal court. And my argument is, it is what it is. If we're doing something wrong, I don't change if we do something wrong based on criminal justice, use of force or procedures, I come in and just say what it is. And you decide whether or not it was correct or not, wrong implications.
So Derek and Doc, what I think we're seeing now is this pendulum swinging the other way, which is the law enforcement officer that doesn't run into the school shooting. The law enforcement officer that does not engage all of a sudden is being criminally prosecuted for negligent crime.
Oh, absolutely.
And sued for not doing their duty, but they're in impossible. They're in an impossible position, right? Like in Florida, Scott Peterson, the DA, the prosecutor prosecuting goes, no, I'm not saying Scott Peterson should have been a human shield for these kids, comma, but he didn't go in.
Yeah.
That was the closing. It's like, wait. And then by the way, on top of all this, like, it's easy when Officer Bob is beating the shit out of somebody who probably doesn't deserve it, or maybe just deserves it a little bit. That's easy. What's hard is Officer Bob is looking at a situation that is inherently dangerous, where he's damned if he does, he's damned if he doesn't. He's going to get sued either way.
Well, it's impossible. It's impossible because now you've drawn a line saying this is too much force. Now you're drawing a line saying it's not enough force, and you're giving the person 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 seconds to be able to figure out the difference of that. And that's why I think I'd be on the side where I don't want a body cam, because I would just be like, I'm going to use the force. And I think a lot of people do. I think it takes a special amount of training.
That's where the training comes in.
A special amount of leadership.
That's where the good policy, the body cam should be something aspirationally that officers lean into and go, nope, that shit's all on body cam. I got it 100%. I did it right. Like, that's the mentality that we should be going for. The unfortunate part is we don't train officers well enough. The policies aren't strong enough on how body cams are or are not used. And there's a lot of cynicism out there. And the cynicism changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. In Georgia, there are parts of the state where I bet a lot of people would be very happy to be a cop in. The police are treated really nicely. It's a great job. There are parts of Georgia where I can't believe they can find one person willing to go police some of these communities, because they are that challenged and broken, and it just indefensible. It kills me when we see the turnover at a couple of our more notorious jails. They can't find post-certified officers to serve in the jails because they're that horrifying.
And in a lot of law enforcement agencies, Doc, chime in on this, that's the first place you serve.
Oh yeah.
The jail.
Well, if you go to a sheriff's office, you will, and the reason why it's actually a good thing, and I did it at my department, very modern department, is that you learn significant skill sets.
Oh, huge.
In the jails. You learn how to deal with people. You learn how to overcome adversity. You learn how to handle mental health issues, because let's face it, today's jails are the mental health asylums of the country.
And people need to understand the percentage of people in your local jail with mental health issues is mind-blowing.
And this goes back to until we have mandated mental health facilities that can help people, or mandated drug treatment capabilities to help people. And my biggest concern is we have a thing called the classification system. Most modern sheriffs have a classification system that looks at evidence. They look at your crime history, your recidivism rate, which is very important. By the way, violent offenders will recidivate up to 70% within the first 5 years of getting out of prison. So we know that's the reason we should pay attention to numbers and pay attention to who does what. So that's one. Mental health, we assess that to our best extent. Medical health, what kind of medical conditions do they have? We look at their education level. Can they read and write? All those things are determined because we have to put them in housing based on separations. And the separations just aren't men and women, but it could be a medical segregation. It could be an administrative segregation. We could arrest a cop. We're not going to put him in general. He's going to go into what's called administrative segregation by himself, so he or she can be protected. If you have AIDS, you're probably going to be put in medical segregation, so you might not contaminate others. If you're transgender, which why the way has become a new social contagion. It's a new social contagion. And oh, by the way, the last 6 significant mass shooters have had some sort of gender fluid identity issues. The last 6. The one that just happened was bullied because of being gay, and he was considered transgendering. This is the shooter in Georgia. By his father's own admission, he was bullied for that. We know the Nashville shooter, the manifest. I did a Substack in depth looking at the manifesto of the Nashville shooter. Significant mental health problems, and as a result of transgenderism, which, oh, by the way, about 80% of people that are going through that will have mental health issues, and about 40% will have suicidal ideation based on the research that I've seen. But nobody wants to talk about it because I'm not being open and rewarding and saying
I won't say people don't want to talk about it. A lot of people are talking about it. It's a very challenging.
Unfortunately,
issue.
like I said before, they have to be singled out at some point. And I dealt with is the wrong word, but at least it's figured out where everybody is kind of all on the same page. Like, again, we talked about this before. None of this really comes out as a surprise. You don't just wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to go kill a whole bunch of people. There's something. You've told someone. Your parents have a feeling. Law enforcement. There's something happening in that.
And if we don't have evidence-based policing, think of the volumes of, you guys know this because you've read police reports, right? You've spent a lifetime reading police reports, going through them. Do you know once you write a police report, most of that shit's gone. It's never viewed again.
Oh,
never.
Right. No.
Think of the vast amount of information that's in that report that we actually need.
I think that AI, speaking, because this is another thing that I just love is technology. AI's work in predictive analytics is going to rapidly change state-citizen encounters in every venue, and that includes law enforcement, because law enforcement is going to suddenly find itself wielding tools we had never imagined before, where cohesive record searches are going to be very different. Collateral attacks there's going to be data mining that is off the charts, and it's going to change how we approach, criminal justice. Because bluntly, if I really want to spend the assets, I can find out so much about you prior to either arresting, prosecuting, or defending you. Doesn't matter who, but I can make one stakeholder's side much more effective by applying more resources.
Josh, it's
on the other side of
it's
the
scientific,
table.
Judging a book by its cover.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Exactly.
But on the other side,
that guy's wearing a black shirt. Arrest him.
yeah, I got one on. You know, on the other side of the table, I agree with that, and there is starting to become software available that we can get that information out, and it pops up as soon as we can sit it. Because if we would have had that for some of these events, I can assure you that person's name would have come up, solved by the police for a mental health condition, solved by the police for mental health.
Absolutely. And here's the very first comment. Josh, the police showed up and told me little Franzi Poo might go do something in 6 months. Let me tell you, they just don't understand that Franzi Poo is never going to do this, that, and the other. And that interaction for Franzi Poo is going to be a new realm of policing. When we talk about red flag laws, I'm like, man, I love the idea of red flag laws. Cops going to take people's guns away because of a civil order. Whoa, you want to talk police shootings? You're going to have a whole lot more of them, because them guys, they ain't giving up no guns.
So what all this is going to have to survive, though, and this is what I struggle with. 2 scenarios. Man, little Timmy really is showing some red flags. We need to step up and do something. And by stepping up and doing something, we save the entire school and numerous unnecessary deaths. Little Timmy's really showing some red flags, and we need to do something. So we do something. So Timmy's family sues the shit out of the school, sues the shit out of everybody, sues the shit out of the teacher, the friends and family, the tribe, if you will, because at the end of the day, the Minority Report-esque policing that we're doing, this scientific,
the state solves these problems. It's my problem with anything the state does. And I come from a perspective where, man, I want universal health care. I just don't like things that the state does in large organizations, because guess what? All large organizations have fundamental flaws that will explode if they don't have proper regulation and leadership. The government does a shitty job of keeping high quality people and running things well. You want the best argument against socialized medicine and all the healthcare debate? Go to the USPS. And I love my postal workers, but the postal office is falling apart. The leadership hates the people drive. It is a disaster. Look at the VA. My grandfather worked for the VA for 30 years, spent his whole life there. The VA has one of the most problematic delivery systems for effective healthcare and betrays our veterans every day. But what's the alternative? You going to trust Louisiana or Mississippi to take care of veterans? They'd be the most pro-patriot groups out there and still screw all those people out of whatever, greed and money. It gets so frustrating.
So I like looking at who are the front lines of defense. It's going to be other students who see little Timmy having issues and speak up, which we that's on us. We've got to put it to where they can do that. So that's one thing. Number 2, going back to the dot, family at home, assuming they have family at home, maybe not giving them AR fucking 15s and paying attention and paying attention, and then the teachers. And that is going to be the rub to me. The rub is going to be the teachers that say, I think little Timmy's really having some problems, and it's kind of the kid might shoot the school up.
But Franz, let me be a jerk. Hey, I bet there were 50,000 AR-15s gifted to teenagers last Christmas. Really?
In that count? In
America. I bet there were literally 40 or 50,000 AR-15 platform rifles that were gifted to people, to non-adults last Christmas.
And 99% of them have not done anything in law-abiding.
And
if we have a weapons problem, the weapons problem is that you can get, if we make it illegal to possess firearms, I can assure you that only bad guys are going to have the firearms.
I love firearms.
I'm not arguing with you guys. I'm just saying there are people who
they've legalized drugs, and there's still drug dealers everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, we can go down this road, but you guys hit something that's so important, and as an ethicist, I think it's important. As technology gets greater, better, we have to have significant guardrails in place to ensure that there's not abuses of power like FBI, FISA. I mean, we can go down a list of different things that can be abused, that we need guardrails, significant guardrails. And then if you commit these crimes, there's significant punishments associated with doing these things wrong, using this data against, weaponizing against people. And until we have that, there is going to be that concern that this information could be used. The problem with red flag laws is they're subjective. And subjective laws are then all of a sudden, who is the arbiter of your punishment, or who is the arbiter in deciding? And that's the reason I think bullying laws. Do we have bullying in this country? Yeah, we have bullying across the world. There were people bullied when I was little. There's bullying that occurs everywhere, but now we have bullying laws. Can someone explain to me the definition of bullying? And bullying is subjective. It's subjective. I could, if someone called me bald, and I think that's bullying.
You're in the right group for that.
You know what I'm gonna say, as the most hirsute around. You're totally right. But and here's the issue: regulations and regulatory. We all agree, man. We need more. We need the right rules. We need the right laws. Da 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 da. But you're 100% right. How they are enforced, when they are enforced, it all ends up being some person who decides this is how it gets applied.
And you know what? And Franz
our nation is so big and diverse.
Franz nailed it with how many Timmys are going to get $1.5 million every time they get pulled out of school for 3 days because they think they're a psycho and they're not, before they scrap this whole plan.
The magic of efficiency of numbers. So, I got to go after this because it's almost 4.
Yeah, I had to get one more thing in for the doc because it was funny. When we booked him at the same time, we booked Simon Majumdar from the Food Network for 2 weeks from now. And then Simon's agent said he knows about everything, travel, cooking, and all that sort of thing, but he's not a barbecue expert. So I ran that by Dr. Myers. He's like, I'm from like the barbecue capital of the world. And he's involved with a Wagyu beef farm. So I just quickly, if you could tell us what the hell is Wagyu beef?
I just noticed Wagyu beef tallow for $29 a can in my local store.
And how do you cook the perfect steak?
So yes, my son-in-law and daughter own a Wagyu ranch in central. It's in Salina. So you went through Salina one time. It's close to Salina. He got into it when it was early. So he actually has certified Wagyu. Most of his group is level A, which means it's at the highest level. So he literally has cows that are sold. He has his own retail location as well, where people can go in and purchase. But really Wagyu
sells cow sperm,
and he sells bull sperm, which is across worldwide. He sends bull sperm,
mega bucks in the genetics.
Australia,
really? Huge bucks in the genetics.
I knew it was horse money. I didn't know it was meat money.
Oh, dude, we breed way more cows than horses worldwide.
Yep, it's a huge opportunity. I love going out there and watching him, and he's one of those guys that can do about anything. Fish hunt. He's an expert barbecuer, so I watch him all the time.
But
the key with Wagyu, if you're going to smoke it, is like with anything, it's low and slow because it's so tender. The omega-3 in Wagyu is probably significant. It's that of the level of probably like bison or something.
It's got such a low melting temperature, the fat in the meat, that literally if you handle a nice piece of it, it gets slippery in your hand because there's that much.
Here's how he cooks it. He puts in a salt block and puts it in the oven, sometimes in the smoker, and gets it up to about 450, 500 degrees. And lets it get very, very hot, keeps it in there for maybe 20, 30 minutes. And then when he pulls it out, he sets it on the table in front of everybody. Naturally, it's hot, you can't touch it. But then he puts he slices the Wagyu and he puts it on the block, and it cooks perfectly in just a few seconds. and it is, you don't ever need a knife. You hardly
Yeah.
need a fork.
Really?
It's a buttery taste to it. And again, most of his quality is A1, which is again the A, B, and C, and 1 through 5. But most of his stock is A1 Wagyu quality. And
you don't want to eat a 32-ounce porterhouse of the stuff. Like, it's so rich.
It is so
After
rich.
a few bites, you're like,
$1,000.
whoa. No, it's like eating foie gras. Like, the closest thing I can say is it really is like eating foie gras, or like, it's so unctuous. It is so toothsome. You can't, you would feel bad. Like,
So the number
4 or
one
5 ounces is all you can.
the number one place I eat it, Derek, is generally at Japanese, like omakase, like
That's right.
bistros, where it's like 1 or 2 bites.
Yeah.
Because anything, I agree with Josh and Doc, anything more than that, I'm like, okay, I'm out. I can't.
Yeah.
And of course, if you buy it, I mean, beef is expensive anyway, but you know, if you want a good 8-ounce Wagyu steak, you better get out your checkbook, because it could be anywhere from probably $500 at the minimum. If you went into a restaurant, maybe even higher.
All right, guys. I hate to go, but
All
I'm
right.
getting
For more Joshua Schiffer, maybe you need advice. Maybe you need a lawyer. Maybe you get caught doing some bad shit on your body cam. Check him out on Twitter at LawyerSchiff, on Instagram at LawyerSchiff, or www.
I'm gonna have a website down
and reach out to me for another spoonful of Franz Borghardt. Check him out on Twitter at Borghardt Law, on Instagram at Franz Borghardt, and for legal stuff at www.borghardtlawfirm.com. For more Dr. Currie Myers, check him out on LinkedIn at Currie Myers, on Twitter at Dr. Currie Myers, IMDb, Substack. Google him or reach out to me, and we'll hook everybody up. Guys, thank you so much.
That rocked. Peace out, everybody. Doc, this was awesome. We need to do this again. Absolutely. And I'm not kidding. Bring your son on your daughter.